Welcome to Crunching Tackles, where we break down the hardest hitting social issues in sports. On today's show, Spain are the World Cup champions, and the Odyssey is the biggest movie on the planet. My name is Chad Wiley, and with me, as always, not even he could stop Donald Trump from staying on the podium during the trophy lift. It's John Nekrasov.
That's true. I mean, Donald Trump, when we said this live as it was happening, he exhibited remarkable, almost Messi-like skill to pump fake Gianni Infantino as he was trying to hook Trump off the stage. Donald was having absolutely none of it, and successfully stayed in frame for the trophy lift, which then Spain immediately airbrushed him out of. I don't know if you saw that on social media afterward, but it was a real moment that we'll get into more later in the show. I feel like more seriously, but the World Cup final happened and Spain won, and it's been a month. It has been a real month.
It's been an amazing month, and we watched the final together. Of course, if you watched our last little preview podcast, little mini show, we were together in person recording, and then we sat down and we watched the World Cup final together. Spain won 1-0. I wouldn't say it was the best game of this World Cup, John.
Certainly not.
But in the end, justice was done, and we're gonna get into that in more detail as well. I guess to start off the conversation, I think we should just jump right in. And I think that we need to acknowledge that before this tournament, you and I both picked Spain to win the World Cup. And then we both bailed out on that prediction mid-tournament for different teams. And ultimately, we should have trusted our gut, because I think going into this tournament, Spain was, even if not in the FIFA rankings, viewed as the best team in the world, the champions of Europe, and with featuring one of the most generationally talented young players in not just modern soccer, but in the history of soccer, full stop. And ultimately, Spain, like we mentioned on the preview show, got better and better and better with every single game that they played in the tournament. And I think that even includes the final, because that was a difficult atmosphere for Spain to go out into. It was a difficult game for them to play with the way that their opponent set up against them. And it is a huge credit to them that they broke through, even though it took extra time, even though it was messy, not Lionel Messi, but a messy game. It is a huge credit to the tenacity of Spain, the resiliency of Spain, and the grit of Spain to grind down a very frustrating team for 120 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it was a remarkable performance, and it just goes to show, I really do think Spain earned their way not only to reach this final, but to also win this final in a way that we'll get into. But Argentina, I don't believe they did whatsoever, and that really was true as this game unfolded. I was astonished by the negativity of Argentina, the lack of intent by Argentina, their complete lack of will to do anything with or without the ball. The defending that they put on the line was not particularly resolute. They just kind of stuck into the game and tried to foul the Spanish players whenever possible, and Emiliano Martinez bailed them out time and time and time again. By the end of regular time, Argentina, for the first time ever, a team in a World Cup final, had not attempted a single shot in 90 minutes of World Cup final action. And if that doesn't go to show what an abysmal performance they put in, I don't know what does. And Spain, on the other hand, they beat 4 teams, including Argentina, ranked in the FIFA's top 10, to end up lifting the trophy. They beat, on their way to the final, Portugal, Belgium, and France, and then beat Argentina, the defending champions, and took the trophy from them. And I think it was richly deserved. You brought up Yamal, who, really is one of the most talented players in the world. And I think that he posed a real threat in many games this tournament that, did imbalance the teams that they were playing. But ultimately, Yamal was not the difference maker in almost any of these games, really. The Spanish collective unit produced different winners time after time, to grind teams down, to suffocate France, to find a way to beat Belgium and Portugal late. And finally, Ferran Torres delivered the decisive goal to catapult Spain into glory for the second time in 20 years. Um, I don't know. I think when we look back on this tournament, I think we thought that this tournament was going to be the story of France, and that's why we really kind of moved away from Spain in the end. Um, but in the end, the story was about the collective discipline of this Spanish team that know how to win soccer games, and that's what matters in the end.
Yeah, I mean they won this tournament through defense and the midfield and then the attack, right? The attack was third. France attempted to do the exact opposite. They were like, who cares about the midfield or the defense when we have such a good attack? And ultimately, you see that for a team like Spain, who conceded only one goal in 8 games at this World Cup, it really came down to like the words that you just said: discipline, structure, togetherness. Like they played as a unit, led by with both insane youth, teenagers, and also just a steady hand of veteran leadership in multiple positions on the field. And I think you can contrast that to Argentina, whose entire World Cup is defined by chaos, and that chaos seeped into the final, where for the first time, finally, a referee treated Argentina fairly and started giving them yellow cards, and then ultimately, eventually, a red card to Enzo Fernandez. And they have been playing this way for this entire game, for the entire tournament. And it finally caught up to them when they finally came up against an opponent who could just handle the nonsense that they were bringing to the pitch. And I mean, not to get away from Spain too quickly, but I thought Argentina should be absolutely every single player should be absolutely ashamed of themselves for the performance
Yeah,
that they put in, including Lionel Messi.
there's no question about it. What I saw on the field in that World Cup final from Argentina was the worst thing I've ever seen in a soccer match, particularly of this magnitude. And I think that really matters. I've seen teams play ugly. We saw Paraguay play ugly in game after game after game this tournament. Um, but I think what was remarkable is Argentina came into this game as the defending world champions, having dragged themselves through this tournament by the skin of their teeth against inferior opponents that they barely managed to beat, often off of the backs of, pretty fortuitous refereeing decisions. Argentina was not on the receiving end of a VAR decision the entire tournament. And that included the final, which is crazy. They still got a goal. Spain had a goal disallowed in extra time that would have put them ahead before they finally got the go-ahead goal. But they did receive a red card in this game because Enzo Fernandez, who I have absolutely no love for, and I think completely disgraced himself throughout this entire tournament. I think he is a terrible person. I think his record, you can look it up, it speaks for itself, including the many racist incidents that he has been, or at least the one or two racist incidents that he's been involved in, the incidents of bad behavior that he's been involved in. I think that when you look at this team, it is a team led by Lionel Messi, who has a lot of goodwill around the world, and then a team of players who spend the entire tournament behaving badly and getting away with it time after time after time. And ultimately, that culture comes from the top, and I think that is down to the coach. And ultimately, I think that Messi plays a role in there in not controlling that team. He's the captain of that team, and I think he has a responsibility to help his teammates play in a respectful way, and he clearly did not. And Argentina reaped the consequences of that in this tournament, and I don't think anyone cried any tears for the result that they received in this final.
The culture of Argentina, the top of Argentina is not the head coach, it is Messi. And it's hard to hold your teammates to a standard when you yourself are behaving disgracefully by trying to accuse Spanish players of red card worthy offenses that they simply did not commit and that the video proves they did not commit, right? Messi, in the midst of all this chaos, he is not acting like an angel who is shocked by the behavior of his teammates. He is falsely alleging that Mark Cucurella covered his mouth while talking to him, despite all video and real evidence to the contrary. And he also just like I don't think that moment is going to be the defining image of his career,
No,
but
certainly not.
he stains himself in this final. Not severely, but in a way that, when taken in the totality of the game, I don't think you can say that he was acting better than his teammates. He was acting just like them. He was leading them in the behavior that they were engaged in on during the 90 minutes. And thankfully, Messi was not involved. But after the 90 minutes were over, Argentina, or not, the 120 minutes, Argentina continued to just disgrace themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the minute the final whistle goes and Spain wins the World Cup, the Argentinian players all over the field begin initiating brawls with the Spanish players. Leandro Paredes, who is just a disgrace and genuinely should be banned from international competition for a good amount of time, immediately begins, essentially throwing punches, pushing people, throws Gavi on the Spanish team to the floor, someone who is considerably younger than him, attempts to choke him, throws him on the ground. Players are being pushed all over the place. The coach is not doing his job to control things. The referees aren't controlling things. And the Argentinian players are just all over the field, showing the absolute contempt they have for fair play, for sportsmanship. When Spain, received the World Cup trophy, the Argentinian players turned their backs on the Spanish players during the entire trophy presentation, which is, again, just an example of just bad behavior, self-centeredness, a refusal to acknowledge your opponents who have beaten you, especially as the defending world champions. Like, this is, you just had your moment. You were roundly beaten by a team that you refused to play on any equal footing. Enzo Fernandez was rightly sent off and then basically refused to leave the field for multiple minutes while he was complaining about the most obvious yellow card challenge that I have ever seen in my life. He sent 19-year-old Pau Cubarsí literally flying into the air, like end over end, literally flying into the air, and then had the nerve to argue with the referee about the yellow card he received that led to a red card. Everything I saw in this field from Argentina was a disgrace, and they did almost equalize. It felt like there were a couple moments where they could, but in the end, they still didn't create enough. And I think Argentina will go home recognizing that they have no one to blame but themselves for this result, because they were a team that was good enough to play in this final, and they refused to because they recognized that Spain were superior to them, and they got into this final because they got lucky multiple times.
But isn't it
And that's
weird?
just the face of it.
Yeah, I feel like it's so weird that their post match behavior seemed like the behavior of a team who thought that they were like wronged and deserved to win a game. But their play in the game was so negative that I don't know how they could possibly have that perspective on how this game went. Like, the attacking player, like, they hardly ever progressed the ball forward in a meaningful way. They had hardly any touches in Spain's box. And like you mentioned, they had 0 shots, not shots on goal, shots period, in the entire 90 minutes of regulation time. And so they did not, like, they are acting as if they were somehow robbed of this win when at no point in the game did they ever even attempt to try to, let alone act like trying to win.
100%. I mean, listen to the stat line. I'm going to read you the stat line from FOTMob of the full 120 minutes.
Okay.
Argentina had 35% possession, 0.22 XG from 2 shots, neither of which were on target. One was blocked, one was off target. Unai Simon, Spain's goalkeeper, did not make a single save. Argentina had 8 touches of the ball in the opposition box, 0 big chances, 25 fouls committed. And that's the story of the game right there.
What do they think they were wronged by?
Like, they were wronged by their own performance.
That's exactly
genuinely.
right. That's exactly right.
I have never seen anything like this in my life. And I think comparing this against the Champions League final, which, everyone said that Arsenal was also playing anti-football. Arsenal went up a goal in the first 10 minutes against PSG, and then proceeded to defend for essentially an entire game. PSG equalized through a penalty, and then Arsenal made it all the way to penalties and lost on penalties. And, people complained about Arsenal defending. I think that those complaints, are fair enough. Like, Arsenal did not feel like they were able to open the game up and made the game pretty boring. But what you can't allege is that they didn't try to play. Like they went out on the field and they played a defensive performance. They battled through the entire thing. They had a few opportunities, but they just could not get anything done. And in the end, PSG was the better team and won on penalties. That was a fair result. Argentina came into this game not even trying to play a defensive game. It was just like they just didn't want to play anything other than fouling Spanish players at every opportunity. And that to me is just like, you should be punished for playing that way. It's dirty soccer. Enzo was rightly sent off. And I don't know. I do think that when we look back on this final, which is probably, Messi has now been in 3 World Cup finals. He's won 1, he's lost 2, both in extra time. Um, I don't know. I think to me, I didn't expect Argentina to win this game unless it was a fluke. But I think that this reflects poorly on him, and I think it reflects poorly on Argentina's approach throughout this tournament. I don't know. I think that like he vanished from this game. And a lot of that is credit to Spain, who I think we should shift back to.
Yeah.
Because they did win this game. But Argentina, in the end, turned the world against them through these performances. And I don't think we should just let that go.
Right. And I mean, I think that you and I have been speaking about this throughout the entire course of this tournament. And I would not say that Argentina's performance in the final was a fluke compared to their performances the rest of this World Cup. Like this has been coming for a while. And I think I even mentioned in the preview pod that Argentina has been playing with fire this entire World Cup. And I just did not believe that magic was going to last for another round. And it didn't. But yeah, I find that the performance by Argentina disappointing, but not at all shocking based on the summation of this tournament. To shift back to Spain,
Yes.
Rodri, who won the golden ball, yes, the ball, is going to get a lot of attention, as is Lamine Yamal, who is the face and the star of that team. But I'd like to talk about actually 4 other players on Spain who I think have been excellent and who I have been very pro, I think, throughout this tournament. One is Unai Simon. We do need to talk about that because his position in the starting lineup was a huge point of controversy, certainly with you, but also with others going into this tournament, because David Raya had just won the Premier League and played in a Champions League final and had led Arsenal, had been an absolutely stalwart keeper for Arsenal. And Spain stick with their longtime keeper, the heir apparent to David De Gea, Unai Simon. And he has an absolute masterpiece of a tournament, including he's like you mentioned, he did not have to make a single save in the final, but 7 clean sheets in 8 games, 1 goal conceded throughout the entire course of the tournament. Could not have possibly gone any better for him. So that's 1. 2, and this was a disappointment that he wasn't more fit, but the final shifted with Nico Williams on the field, which is something we also mentioned in the preview. Man, he's good. And I think he would have been a starter the whole tournament had he been healthy. This was not like a new discovery. He really is that good. But his assist to set up the goal and just the energy that he brought to the game when he came on really is what took this game from a very tense game in which Argentina was holding on to an onslaught that was ultimately going to break through, because Argentina could not contain both him and Yamal at the same time. The third player is one who I am one of like the champions of, and that's Ferran Torres, who I believe should have been starting this entire tournament instead of either Alex Baena or Oyarzabal. And he did not. But in the key moments that counted, it was his goal that broke through. And I'm happy for him. I think he's a good player. I watch him a lot at Barcelona. I think he's underrated, honestly, compared to the quality that he brings. And then fourth, the young player of the tournament, a player that I don't think anyone was aware of, is 19-year-old Pau Cubarsí, the center back for Barcelona and for Spain. He was born in 2007, which just hurts my heart to say out loud.
That is brutal.
And he is amazing playing with anybody, but like he's 19 years old. He's with an experienced center back pairing with Aymeric Laporte, and he not only holds his own, he shines. And yeah, I think Spain have a roster full of stars for not just this tournament, but for the next couple World Cups and the next few Euros as well.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't put a foot wrong this entire tournament. It was absolutely unbelievable. I was so impressed by him. I think that I think that he was just such a standout player to me that I don't even like. He wasn't even underrated. Like, obviously, he got the award, so I guess he can't have been underrated. But it was just a remarkable performance in every single game. He had so much assurance against. He played against France, against the best attackers in the world, and he looked just completely unflappable. I think you're completely right to shout out Unai Simon, who made less saves in the entire tournament than Emiliano Martinez did in the World Cup final alone. But he did it when it counted. I do think that David Raya could have also helped this team win the World Cup, but I don't think Unai Simon put a foot wrong.
I think
And
that's fair.
I think given the balance that he has in winning, now back to back international trophies, it makes perfect sense to keep the team balanced that Luis de la Fuente already had. I unfortunately need to shout out two of my least favorite people coming to this tournament: Pedro Porro, who plays for Tottenham, and Marc Cucurella, who has moved from Chelsea to Real Madrid. I have no love for either of those people in my heart. However, they really put in the best fullback performances of anyone in this World Cup. Cucurella shut down Kylian Mbappe. He just looked sublime,
Mhm.
and Pedro Porro had some crucial interventions. He even scored against against France. So both of those guys put in incredible performances. And also, I would just like to shout out Danny Olmo, who is a good player. He featured consistently for Spain in Euro 24. Um, but he is absolutely an underrated player, even though he plays for Barcelona, who shows up in big moments, is super creative. He may not be Mikel Merino, who will always be my unsung hero of this tournament. We are now starting to sing his songs, but Dani Olmo really did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, I mean, Olmo plays essentially the same role for Spain that Jude Bellingham plays for England, or that um, Odegaard would play for Norway. It's a very important, crucial role, and Olmo is not as popular or as well known as those guys, but he, like you said, he's a consistent player for Barcelona, a consistent player for Spain, and he was every time that Spain looked like they were kind of losing the foothold on the game. It was Dani Olmo who would track back, pick up the ball, keep the ball moving forward, and progress with those wide passes out to Yamal, or on the left wing as well.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I think what Spain has done since 2008, so 18 years ago, um, has been genuinely profoundly remarkable. Since 2008, Spain has won 3 Euros in 2 World Cups, um, which no other country in the world can say that. And to that point, I believe Spain certainly had not won the World Cup, and I believe they had never won the Euro either. Like, this has been a transformation of a country's international program, obviously partially due to the success of La Liga, but very much due to the success of ultimately of the Football Association of Spain. And you see their focus on creating technically brilliant players who are confident on the ball, who know how to play together, who play together from an early age, um, has reaped unbelievable dividends for them. Where they may not have a Kylian Mbappe. Obviously, they have Yamal, who is genuinely tremendous, but in that time, Spain's brilliance has ultimately been your Xavis, your Iniestas, your Rodris, your Fabian Ruizes, your Pedris, your Dani Olmos, the guys who know how to control a game in the biggest moments when, the intensity of a team that literally wants to rip you apart bone by bone. Like, controlling a game of that magnitude is difficult. And Spain has proved time and time again that they can do it. And when we look at Euro 2028, if Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal are fit, and you still have the core of this team there, you have to look at it and say, like, okay, what team in every position is better than Spain in Europe?
Yeah, I mean that's the right question. They have the belt, right? Who's good until they are challenged? They are the de facto favorites in any tournament they play.
Right. I
And
think we need
what
to start taking that
I
seriously.
think so. Yeah. What other thoughts from the World Cup do you have?
Do we want to talk about the vibes of the final? Is that a conversation
Yeah,
we should have?
yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was really weird, to be honest. I don't know that I like. How did you feel about the pageantry of the World Cup final? I feel like large sporting events are always a little bit ridiculous in some way, so I don't want to like denigrate this one too much. But I really felt like the amount of pageantry that was thrown into this took away from it a lot for me, or just it really like interrupted the way the game developed, especially early on.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were complaining about the pre-show
For hours.
for
Yeah.
hours before this game, in large part because they put Zlatan and Thierry just in various forms of transportation throughout the entire pre-show, and then did not spend enough time actually talking about the match or the
Right.
countries who were playing in the match, and that was frustrating. The pre-game ceremony with like a YouTube streamer performing a song at the World Cup, I thought was completely unnecessary. Um, I don't think the World Cup should have a halftime show.
It never has.
It never has before. Like the Super Bowl, it's a marquee part of the Super Bowl. And while I will never pass up an opportunity to see Justin Bieber, someone who I've talked about on this podcast and in pro, like I don't think that his 45 seconds of singing in this show made up for just the fact that like this felt like it was very commercial and forced and not it was more it was while it was let me put it this way. It was authentic to America but not to football. And I think the World Cup needs to be authentic to the game first. And then from there, let the country kind of sprinkle in parts of their culture. But this was, I think, American culture trying to bash football in the head in a way that I did not enjoy at all.
And also, it was just like, I don't think it was even true to American culture. Like if that was a Super Bowl halftime show, that would be the worst halftime show of all time.
Right, but
It was a complete non-entity.
Yeah, I
So it's
agree.
like both a forced pageantry and also like just mediocre in execution. Justin has a great voice. We love the Biebs here. We represent him well. Our guys Ted Lasso and Coach Beard showed up, which was fine. They had a nice Believe poster.
Yeah, to sub Justin Bieber into the halftime show is quite literally what they were there to do.
Trying to save the halftime show with a late Bieber substitution, much like Ferran Torres.
Yeah,
however, he did not. He did not save it.
Yeah, I hope that they don't do that again.
Please, I never want it again.
Yeah. Should we do we need to talk about the trophy lift?
I think we did. I think a deep dive into this trophy lift is exactly what our listeners want, at least evidenced by the text that I received since the World Cup. Do you want to break it down? What exactly happened?
So it was reported a while ago, weeks ago, that it would be in fact Donald Trump who would be presenting the trophy to the winning team. This was something that we all watched last year in the Club World Cup final when Donald Trump presented the trophy to Cole Palmer and Chelsea, and then just refused to leave the podium as all of the Chelsea players are looking at him, waiting for him to leave. And then finally, they just like get tired of waiting. And so they just lift the trophy with Donald Trump standing in the middle of the group of them, like right in the front middle, like right next to Captain Cole Palmer. And so as soon as it was reported that Trump would be doing this again at the World Cup, the only thought on everyone's mind is, will FIFA be able to get Donald Trump to not do this again? And the answer is a resounding no. Because Donald Trump hands the trophy to Rodri and then begins to walk away with Gianni Infantino before taking a very shocking zag across the podium to the other side, where he tries to like talk to Pedri and then stands, thankfully not in the middle, but off to the side as the trophy is presented. In another situation in which Rodri is just like looking at him like, will you get out of our moment? And Trump, of course, refuses. And so they lift the trophy and Trump is there. And then Gianni, and my favorite part of this is when Gianni realizes that Trump is no longer with him and goes running across the front of the stage right before Rodri lifts the trophy to try to pull Trump away, and Trump just refuses. He just stands there. He just won't move. He's like a linebacker, just anchored in place.
I mean, he does
And
an incredible little like body fake too to get away from Johnny, who's starting to try to pull him.
yeah,
But Johnny's never going to like do a full forceful pull on the president of the United States, and so it just ends up with Trump still in the photo, which of course he's then photoshopped out of. But it's just one of the symbolic moments
right.
of this
I mean,
tournament, surely.
is Donald Trump being at the trophy lift like the telltale sign of the end of Western civilization? No.
No.
I'm not gonna overreact and act like this is a big deal. However, I think it is dumb and stupid and very on brand for Trump to take a moment that these 26 men have worked their lives for and still make it about him, because that is the Donald Trump blueprint. He is
I mean,
one of the most selfish, self-centered people in the history of Earth.
this is also not new. Lest we forget, in 2022, Lionel Messi lifted the Qatar World Cup in the traditional, Arabic garb of Qatar, which is definitely not traditionally worn in Argentina, and obviously, was mandated by FIFA for him to wear that. Salt Bay, the Turkish chef, lifted the World Cup trophy last time. So this is now, obviously is relatively new in terms of his full history of soccer, but since 22, FIFA's, Johnny's FIFA is getting more and more involved. And Trump, got to insert himself in the situation, which is just cringe. It's just cringe. If you are a massive politician, if you're a celebrity, you are not the center of this. The team that just won is the center of it. And you know who exemplified that, Chad? Who exemplified that? The King of Spain, who very classily handed out gold winner medals to the players of Spain, and also I think to the Argentinian
He was there.
runner-up
Yeah.
players, and did not take the moment for himself from people of his own country, and but also recognize their incredible accomplishment while looking incredibly well tailored as always, and that's it reflects well on him, I would
One
say.
of the classiest heads of state in the history of the world. I think what's so funny about this is that like the World Cup trophy is obviously not about Donald Trump, and he should realize that it's not about him. But in order to appease him, FIFA created a prize that was all about Donald Trump that he could hoist with as much joy and as much jubilance as he wanted to. The FIFA Peace Prize, like they gave him an award like that, like to appease him, I think, from all of this, from the need to, well, one, have a Nobel Peace Prize, but also like the need to try to collect every other form of FIFA hardware that exists. And he just can't help himself. He sees a gold object and he sees cameras, and he just has this primal need to be as close to the gold objects and the flashy cameras as he possibly can. And it is just a weird impulse that I don't think he just can't help himself.
You're forgetting that
He's
they literally
Gollum.
gave him the
Gollum.
club. They gave him the Club World Cup trophy. It's in the White House.
Right. Man sees shiny objects and just loses his mind.
It's very strange. And ultimately, I'm glad that I think given the way the tournament went, obviously the Flo Balogun situation did not reflect well on the U.S. But other than that, and the trophy lift, ultimately, I feel like from a political standpoint, this tournament went pretty well. And I do think that is something to shout out. I feel like it went smoothly, and ultimately had less complications, again, with the exception of the Balogun incident, than the Qatar World Cup, which is not the benchmark we want to measure against, but still, it was it overall happened with minimal amounts of fuss and interference, which I think is a good thing.
And John, not only did it go smoothly, but it was incredibly popular. And we're going to debrief this.
Unprecedentedly popular.
Yeah. We're going to talk about this more in our next podcast, but we just need to say what we just realized a few minutes ago before coming on, which is that the World Cup final did 73 million views across Fox and Telemundo in the United States, which would put it in the same tier as an NFL playoff game.
which is astonishing.
It's a massive number. And we're going to have a lot of time to talk about like the future popularity of this sport in this country, but we thought that Belgium USA was a big number, and it was. This is 13 million more than that. This is a
Mm-hmm.
smashing number.
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge deal. Soccer has never been bigger in the United States of America, and that's something to celebrate. I think this World Cup, from an American perspective, was an unprecedented success for this sport. And the question is going to be, and we'll talk about this in the next show, and we want to know what you guys think. If you're a new soccer viewer, we want to know kind of if you have a plan of action for engaging with the sport of soccer long term. Or if you're not particularly interested, like we are curious about kind of where people are at. I think we should talk about how to get into soccer maybe more holistically in our next show as well, maybe just for a little bit. But I don't know. I think that we really did turn a corner. I think that the narrative that soccer is lame or un-American died this summer for the first time ever. And I think that's a huge deal because it's difficult to shake that in a country that has, 4 other major sports competing with it. But I think that narrative is officially over, and having hosted the World Cup in the age of social media has changed the image of soccer permanently here.
This is a little teaser for next podcast, John, but I contend to you that soccer is the third most popular sport in America
I think it's unquestionable.
right now.
Unquestionable.
And I think even 2 or 3 years ago, I still would have said it was fifth. And now I think it's firmly in third position.
Yeah, I mean, it got way more views than NBA
Finals.
Like, I mean, it is. I guess like March Madness probably is still above it. We'd have to go check those numbers, just in sum total for the U.S. But you have the NFL and college football, you have college basketball, and you have soccer now.
Mm-hmm.
Regular season is going to be different because the World Cup is a 4-year, once every 4-year kind of event. But this is an unprecedented impact for the World Cup itself in comparison to other World Cups, in American history.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just been an absolute delight to talk about the World Cup with you for the last really years, but especially the last month and a half. And we're not entirely done because we will talk about it again on the next podcast just to kind of do a final wrap up. But what the final was not as good of a game as this World Cup deserved, because this was an awesome World Cup. And I've had the best time since the beginning of June.
Me too, sir. And thank you for potting with me. Thanks to everyone who's been listening and been with us on this journey. We hope you stick around if you came to us just for the soccer, because we talk about soccer a lot and we talk about other sports as well. We'll get to some films a little bit. That's another kind of niche that we cover on this show, just because we're nerds like that. I would like to talk about a game that was better, just briefly, than the World Cup final, which was the World Cup third place match, which was the single most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. England beat France 6-4 in the third place match to finish out the games that were played this weekend, and I've never seen something so ridiculous in my life on a soccer field. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, while I don't believe that Kylian Mbappe should have been eligible to win the Golden Boot based on games that took place in a, from my perspective, non-competitive match like the third place game, the game was amazing. It really, it had no business being as entertaining as it was. And in fact, it had no business being in any way a decent game at halftime, when it looked like France had just already flown home to France.
Right.
And had put
it was 4-0 at halftime.
It looked like they had put 11 American NCAA college soccer players in the French jerseys, and it all gone home. And then the second half is just one of the greatest shows you've ever seen in a meaningless game.
6 goals are scored in the second half. And it was astonishing. France, Michael Olise, who set the World Cup record for assists, passing Pele, I think he had 7 this tournament, had multiple chances to equalize and make it 4-4.
Yeah, and he had a hat trick of really bad misses.
And did not cover himself in glory, and England ended up kind of putting things away. France pulled a goal back, but then Jude Bellingham scored and made it 6-4, and that was the end of that. And it was a great tournament for Jude. Um, and yeah, I think France exemplified the issues in that team. Obviously, in the game that didn't matter at all, but I don't know. There were issues
Yeah.
there, and England demonstrated. I want to talk about England for a minute. This is a digression, and then I'm done with World Cup yapping. But I just want to get this off my chest as a quasi England fan. Argentina, who beat England with a dramatic flurry late in the semifinal, go into the World Cup final and demonstrate that they were a mediocre team. I think pound for pound, England has a superior roster to Argentina, and Thomas Tuchel coached like a coward, benched some of England's best players, including both Marcus Rashford and Bukayo Saka, who scored a hat trick in the third place match, which I think only 4 Englishmen have ever done in the World Cup ever. Neither of them touched the field. He played Saka and Rice the entire game, who supposedly were not fit to play in the most important match of England's World Cup. And I watched that. I watched them tear France apart repeatedly, and I just watched that and said, you know what? You let the team down as a coach this tournament, and I think that England will leave this tournament disappointed in their performances, given the quality of the roster that they had and the easiness of the draw they had.
I think what's disappointing about it is that Tuchel said after the semifinal loss to Argentina that his roster, his lineup decisions were based on fitness and injuries. And then, and when the truth, which is what I told you on the podcast, is just that Thomas Tuchel had no idea what to do at the wide positions of his team,
Right.
which is just, and the fact that Bukayo Saka, who is seemingly unfit to play against Argentina, and Declan Rice, who had to be subbed off against Argentina because of fitness, and Marcus Rashford, who did not feature against Argentina, the fact that all of them not only played, but in Bukayo Saka's and Declan Rice's case, basically played the entire game against France is just shocking. Like the lineup that Tuchel played when it didn't matter was significantly better than the lineup he played when he just got in his head and, like I said, just had no grasp on what to do at those positions. And Saka and Rashford proved that, like, they were the forwards the entire tournament for England. They were the 2. And I know Saka, like, was not fit at the beginning of this tournament. That is
Yeah,
true.
he was
But
not. Yeah.
in the knockout rounds, it should have been Saka and Rashford all along.
Yeah.
That's just the
And
truth.
Gordon was great. Like, I understand the decision to play Gordon, but Rashford made an impact when he played, and it makes sense to bring him on. And Saka made an impact every single game that he played, even if it was like for 20 minutes. And it's inexcusable. I think if Tuchel had not won the Champions League with Chelsea when he came in after like 5 months, I think we'd be recognizing that Tuchel is kind of a fraud. I'm
Yeah,
kind of done with his coaching resume. Like, if you look at his career, he is actually kind of a failure.
I mean, that's undeniably true.
I think he's won Liga and he's won the Champions League with Chelsea, and that's basically it.
It'll be interesting to see if he is at the 2028 Euros with England. And it's possible that, like, I mean, it seems now that, like, Pep Guardiola might be coaching Italy. And
if that's true, that will be insane.
And that Jurgen Klopp is going to be coaching Germany. So it's going to be a very different looking international scene here in just in 2 years.
Celebrity coaches just rotating around. Here we go. We'll talk about that too next time.
Yeah. Anything else on the football, John?
No, I think unless you have anything else, I think it's time to move on to the real main event of the show.
My heart and mind is clear.
Yeah.
And my heart and mind is clear on our next topic, which
Let's move
is
on.
the other thing that you and I got to watch together over the weekend, John, which was Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey.
Which we did.
If you're new to the pod, we have not talked about a film in a while, but film is one of the, I'll speak for myself, one of the defining passions of my life.
True. I mean, same.
And
Yeah,
and true for you as well. And we got to see The Odyssey on Friday night in IMAX. And we wanted to talk about it because this has been, I think, the most anticipated movie of the year, certainly in my year. And
the last few years, surely, to be honest.
right. And we would not be us if we didn't spend at least half an hour here just
Of course.
discussing, just basking in the glory of what Christopher Nolan has brought to the screen. So, John, what do you have to say about Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey?
I want to talk about a lot of things in relation to the Odyssey. And I think we need to give it the time it deserves. I think that we will hash out a lot of things regarding the Odyssey, and I think it's right to do so because I don't know. I think this is unquestionably the biggest movie event of the year, of the last couple years at least, if not the last three. Um, Nolan's Oppenheimer won Best Picture. It swept the awards in 2023. Since then, Nolan has been building up to adapting basically the oldest and biggest story we have that's not the Bible. You know, in terms of work of fiction, like it is really the biggest and oldest um, kind of piece of human heritage that we have. Um, and so it's a incredible privilege for him that he was able to even start trying to adapt this. And it was also surrounded by controversy, mostly online, as it kind of came closer and closer to release, which we can talk about a little bit. I think most of it is actually super lame, and I really don't want to spend a lot of airtime talking about the controversy surrounding the Odyssey because it's really not. I don't think I don't think the culture war parts of what make discussing the Odyssey interesting are actually at all interesting. But there are lots of things I do want to talk about. But I just want to say, first of all, we finished opening weekend. It's Tuesday. The Odyssey absolutely destroyed Christopher Nolan's global opening record at $264 million over opening weekend. That is more than, like, domestically, The Odyssey made less than the first two Batman movies. Globally, it beat Batman. Like, it is his biggest opening ever as an R-rated adaptation of a sword and sandal epic poem, which is just crazy. That is real pull. Uh, and I think that we have to just start off by acknowledging, like, this is the World Cup is leading into once again another monoculture event, which is awesome for us, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, and it's not just like obviously a lot of advertising went into this and a lot of money was spent
Of
on
course, yeah,
putting this movie, exposing this movie to people, putting, you know, top tier movie stars in this movie that were going to draw people to the box office. Obviously, Christopher Nolan's name comes with its own built in base and brand. But this movie would not be doing as well if it wasn't an absolute stone cold, flat out masterpiece that everyone's going to tell their friends to go see in the biggest format possible because that's exactly what it is. Like, if you miss the Odyssey in theaters, you are missing what is like probably the defining film spectacle of your lifetime. Period. Miss it at your own peril.
yeah. It is a real spectacle. Um, I don't know. How do you want to structure this conversation? Because I feel like there's so many avenues that we can go down. I guess I would just ask you to start. Um, what was your favorite thing about the Odyssey, and then we can go from there. Because I think there are lots of avenues that I wanna track down. I really did enjoy it, but I do think we have a little bit of a difference in opinion that we'll also talk through. But I want to start with the awesome because I think everyone acknowledges, no matter what your opinion, unless you're super lame and on the internet and terminally online, that the Odyssey is just like one of the most insane things that's ever been put to film.
Yeah, asking me what my favorite part of the Odyssey is difficult because every 15 minutes or so, Christopher Nolan presents something so outrageous to my eyes that it's almost like I can't possibly fathom what I'm seeing. I do think as I have thought about this film for a significant amount of time now over the weekend and into this week, the last, I would say 45 minutes of the Odyssey are so good, and not it's not because they are the biggest spectacle, but because it is such a cathartic release of everything that Christopher Nolan's put time and tension and energy and editing into building. Particularly, and I have no qualms spoiling a 3,000-year-old story, but
Spoiler
particularly
alert.
the way that Robert Pattinson's character, Antonius, becomes so just odious to the viewers, and from the moment that Odysseus returns to Ithaca as disguised as a beggar and enters the palace until the end of the movie. It to me, it is like watching it's like the only thing I can think of is like watching the end of Gladiator, where it's just like you just feel this incredible sense of justice and catharsis as as Odysseus just ravages through the suitors in one of the, like, again, just such a fascinating Nolan set piece because he really has never put hand to hand combat in a film in this way, with the exception of some Batman fights, and even those are nothing compared to like a full on swords, spears, shields, bow and arrow, hand to hand interior fighting sequence, and it is as good as that action has ever been put to screen.
Yeah, it becomes Bronze Age John Wick, which is
Yeah.
just something that we don't get to see very often, and it's great. The moment when he like restrings the bow
Yeah.
and plucks it, and everyone's like, "Oh no, we're in serious trouble," is just awesome. I really did. I enjoyed Matt Damon's physicality a lot in this performance because I think he brings a lot. He brings a lot to that fight. You see Jason. I mean, he was Jason Bourne back in the
Yeah.
day, right? And
Mhm.
you see that really come to the fore in a totally new mode in this movie, which is fun. Like you don't get to see Matt Damon, I feel like, in another time very often outside the 20th century. And interestingly, I mean, Christopher Nolan has also really not, with the exception of The Prestige, which is like maybe late 1800s, really has always been in the last century or so. Um, so it's a big step back for him. It's a big step back for Matt Damon. Um, you know, Tom Holland also played a key role in this movie. Anne Hathaway, I thought, was great. Um, it's just a huge star-studded cast from beginning to end. Um, just a little shout out to Benny Safdie as Agamemnon, who just is basically Greek Darth Vader, and just has some incredible moments just standing. He really doesn't say very much at all
No one
until
has
like
ever done more with less in any film than Agamemnon in the Odyssey.
the only comparison is Darth Vader in Rogue One. Like it is genuinely like the most he does the most with very little, and that's a lot of fun. Um, I just want to talk a little bit about the Nolan has talked a ton about practical effects over the last decade or so in particular. This was not, he obviously was dedicated to it early in his career, but I think he has kind of made a point of showing that he will make visuals that endure because they're real on your screen in a way that like so many modern things, the Avengers Doomsday trailer came out yesterday or the day before, and everything was like the fakest thing I've ever seen. And like the contrast could not be more drastic when you look at like just the ridiculous set pieces that we're seeing on in Marvel these days. And then you have Christopher Nolan literally using real life boats in the middle of the ocean that are like splashing up and down and all over the place and like breaking apart, and literal like real life dolphins are just like appearing next to the boats like being blessed by Poseidon in the filming. Like you can't do that if it's CGI.
Right, that like
It's
the
unbelievable.
the greatest benefit, like the best proof of the idea of practical filmmaking is that sometimes you capture magic you didn't even plan on, right? Like there's no way to capture real dolphins going by your boat if you're filming in the volume. But if you're shooting on water for 45 days, there's a good chance you're going to see some actual sea life. And then the movie becomes so magical because it feels like the actual forces of nature are like helping you make this movie, because they actually are, because you're actually filming a movie.
Yeah, you're making a real movie. You're
Yeah.
recording real things as
Yeah.
opposed to a bunch of nonsense. And I think that's huge. And I think Christopher Nolan continues to be a force in Hollywood that is not only winning over Hollywood, but winning over the public at large in the world. And I think that's huge. I think that's awesome. Every time that he makes a movie now, I mean, it's, Jim Cameron makes a splash just by making a movie. And obviously he uses a ton of visual effects. Christopher Nolan, I think, essentially has as big of a pull as a brand. And obviously, the Odyssey, as its own kind of form of IP, also has an incredible brand awareness that make people interested. All the actors are a big deal as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, the Cyclops, I didn't even kind of think about it when we were watching it, but the Cyclops is all all practical effects in a real like historic Greek cave that they are like putting a giant puppet in, and filming. Hades, which I think was filmed in Iceland, honestly is probably my favorite sequence of the movie. It is uncanny, and you have literally people who, according to the behind the scenes footage, were literally like buried in dirt that are then like raised above the dirt, like the bodies come crawling out of the dirt to come talk to Odysseus.
He gave them
And
snorkelers so that they could
yeah,
breathe while they were buried alive in the dirt.
I guess it's crazy. And it paid off. And I do think that like the moments that worked the most for me were times when you feel that reality of being in the elements and exposed to the elements, and you feel like the tininess of humanity in comparison to the force of nature. And I think Christopher Nolan he can capture with his camera that power in a way that very few filmmakers can.
Yeah, I mean, you'll never forget the first time you saw the Laestrygonians or the Cyclops or the Battle of Troy or the Whirlpool. Like those are indelible images that are so profound and so powerful and rare, so rare, like once in a lifetime kind of rare that you just never forget the first time you saw it. To me, like Nolan is in a class by himself, not just of contemporary filmmakers, but potentially of all time filmmakers, because he, to me, is the only person who takes the physical visual images of spectacle and the actual writing of a story as so seriously. Nobody else does that, right? Like if you look at contemporary filmmakers, like Denis Villeneuve did not write Arrival. Ridley Scott did not write Gladiator or Kingdom of Heaven. Like there is no one. There are people who are great writers like Wes Anderson and Noah Baumbach who make great movies, but they don't have the capacity to hit the visual heights that Nolan can hit. And there are amazing visual creators like Gareth Edwards or J.J. Abrams, or like you mentioned, Jim Cameron, who can't write story, right? Like what do we say about Avatar? It's the coolest looking spectacle, and the story makes no sense. And Christopher Nolan somehow does both. He does both. He somehow is so good at writing and so good at storytelling that he sits in a class by himself. Like the only comparisons that you can even begin to make are films like Lawrence of Arabia or Ben-Hur or The Ten Commandments. But again, David Lean didn't write Lawrence of Arabia, and William Weil didn't write Ben-Hur, and Cecil B. DeMille didn't write the Ten Commandments. Like Christopher Nolan's commitment to writing his own either original stories or adaptations, making stories that are so profound and so interesting, and then also his commitment to being the greatest technical filmmaker in the history of this medium is completely unparalleled in the history of film. There's no one who has ever had his power, his influence, or his popularity, in my opinion, in the like 100 plus years of this art medium.
He definitely, obviously, I'm a Nolan bro too, so I agree that I think that he has defined specifically this era of film in a very unique way. Um, I think that when you look at someone like a Kurosawa, I'm not sure. Do you know if Kurosawa wrote his own stuff?
He
Because
did.
obviously
Hmm.
he did. Like I think that there are filmmakers throughout history who really have made the most of the resources that they had, while also being key roles in the writing process. I want to give them their flowers too, because I think that Nolan has the most tools available to use that any filmmaker has had, and uses them to the most that he can. And I think that that is a remarkable achievement in this specific time. I think that his ability to tell huge stories in an age where most of the time studios give filmmakers money for franchises is unparalleled in this era, because most of the time movies like the Odyssey don't make endless amounts of money. Like that's just difficult. Um, Ridley Scott from back in the day had the ability to kind of draw in that audience, but Ridley has lost his sword and sandal power. Um, Villeneuve has done it with Dune to at least a degree, but it's he even his income is dwarfed by what Nolan is accomplishing at this point. And I think that's a huge deal. Um, so yeah, it's incredible. I think that the blank check that he got with Oppenheimer, as many are saying, in an Edward Teller, Benny Safdie voice, is going to result in an even blanker check after the Odyssey
Until they write a blanker check.
yeah, because this movie is going to make $1 billion, I think, almost unquestionably, and that happening is basically unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, like it is the surest investment in Hollywood.
Right, it is.
Like, I mean, it's him and Jim. And I think Jim, like any James Cameron movie, will be around that range of financially. I don't know if Avatar: Fire and Ash crossed $1 billion, but I'm sure it got at least close.
It definitely did. No, it did.
But then if you look at like critically also like what Nolan can do, and just like my personal opinion from as a storyteller, like I said, like as a writer, as someone who is putting the word is also taking seriously the words that the actors are saying and not just the visuals we're seeing, is what separates him even from James Cameron or from Villeneuve or from people like that. Like that is what puts him. The fact that the same person who did the Odyssey could also do Memento is what sets him apart. He
Right.
operates in every lane at the highest level that lane, almost at the highest level that lane can be operated in. I'm not saying he's the greatest screenwriter in Hollywood, but he's a very, very excellent screenwriter and is also the best visual technician in this game.
Undoubtedly true. With that, though, on the writing level, I do have some notes for Chris that I think it's time to discuss. I'm trying to think of where to start. I guess the question I want to ask is, when we look at the Odyssey and the story that Christopher Nolan is telling, you and I both read the Odyssey ahead of watching this movie. And I think that's not necessarily true for the majority of people who go into the Odyssey. Though I think once people watch the Odyssey, it's turning out that a lot of people are very interested in going back and reading the Odyssey, which apparently the numbers of the bestseller charts are just full of Odyssey adaptation or translations now, which is awesome. I found myself analyzing the movie from both a Nolan lens and also an Odyssey adaptation lens. And I want to be careful here because I don't want to enter a realm of like gatekeeping the Odyssey, as we've discussed many times, because I think that's super lame. I think that the Odyssey's been adapted obviously many times.
With varying degrees of seriousness.
With varying degrees of seriousness. Brother, Where Art Thou is one of my favorites, which is a completely unserious film. Is absolutely insane, done by the Coen brothers. It's set in like late 1800s, early 1900s America, and is basically Odysseus as the leader of a chain gang trying to escape and running through the American South. And it's manic, but it also like captures something of the spirit of the Odyssey. And I think Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, to me, and I really I genuinely want your full opinion here and pushing back to me. Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, to me, is a very modern retelling of the plot points of the Odyssey with the lens of a modern person transposed onto the characters of the Odyssey. And I think that works for a modern audience, because I think that if you actually read the Odyssey, there are many circumstances, which we can get into. There are many circumstances where the actions and viewpoints of the characters of the Odyssey are diametrically opposed to the viewpoints of most people in the modern world today. And so then Nolan is kind of confronted with a very difficult question of like, how do I faithfully adapt this story? Which I think he does a pretty good job of, while also telling my own story and also making a story that is going to make a lot of money and not have everyone be like, everyone in this movie sucks. because I think that would be the natural response of someone if they just saw a completely faithful adaptation of the Odyssey on screen. Um, but I don't know. I think there are a few categories that like stuck out to me that I did want to talk about. I'm curious, like as a starting point for this conversation, when you're watching a movie like this, are you particularly looking for it to reflect the spirit of the source material, or are you are you pretty happy as long as it retains in general the essence of the story? Like, how do you approach an adaptation in terms of rating it?
I think that, watching the Odyssey, I'm certainly checking off the set pieces as they come because those are things that I remember and know. But I feel like I am not looking for something that makes me feel the same way as the book makes me feel. I'm looking for something that is coherent and compelling and that moves and generates a narrative within itself. And if the characters ring true in their world to me, then that's something that I will accept, particularly from a fiction perspective, right?
Right.
That is not something I extend to something like Ridley Scott's Napoleon, which is based on is attempting to do essentially nonfiction storytelling about a real historical figure. But something like the Odyssey, which spoiler alert, like the Siege of Troy and Helen of Troy and the actual existence of Odysseus as a real king are all highly in doubt and may or most likely are not real. And so like I'm not looking for the the most historically accurate version of what Odysseus would be, or even the most literary accurate version of Odysseus. I'm looking for something that rings true as a story.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting way to frame it because I think for me, so when I think you can kind of summarize the thrust of Nolan's Odyssey as Odysseus, again spoilers, essentially breaks the moral code of hospitality by using artifice to break into Troy and lay waste to it, which then triggers a chain reaction where all the Greek soldiers go home and pillage and loot on their way. And on the way, essentially, that self destructiveness causes mayhem around the world, and it ends up causing Odysseus's crew to all die. And Odysseus comes home and realizes his house is completely out of order and does one final act, basically, of violence and destruction, having kind of overcome his hubris to make it home, and then, regrets all of his actions, basically kills the suitors, and then leaves leaves Ithaca, his home, in charge of his son, and goes off into the west to basically atone for his sins. Um, which is an interesting lens because it is a very Christian lens, which is not a lens that like ancient Greeks would have understood at all. Obviously, not like Homer, like not like the characters of the Odyssey, because they most likely were not real, but like the Homer's audience at the time would not have understood the lens that Christopher Nolan applied to the Odyssey. I don't know if that's necessarily bad, but I do think that like the story that Homer is telling about a crafty person, like as an example, Christopher Nolan's Athena is kind of like a figment of Odysseus' imagination a little bit. That's kind of like born out of a vision he has of a priestess of Athena in Troy being murdered by Greeks. And he then kind of transposes that priestess into various levels of metaphor of Athena speaking to him and guiding him through this process. The Homer's version of Athena basically told Odysseus to create the horse to sack Troy and like help them build it. And then basically is a big fan of Odysseus because he is a crafty guy who is super wily, and she thinks that's kind of fun and kind of guides him along the journey. She guides Telemachus into becoming a man and taking charge of their home. Um, and so, like, I don't know. I think when I'm looking at an adaptation, I think the technical parts of this movie are just like superb, genuinely. I think I sometimes struggle a little bit when the spirit of the story is so far from the source that it is like Christopher Nolan came into the story with a completely different end goal than Homer did in terms of what it meant to bring Odysseus home. And so I think that's interesting. Like, I think that I don't think it reflects badly on Nolan because obviously it's landed very well with tons of people around the world. But I do think that it says a lot about the the different world we live in and the way that we process stories and how the way the way that we process stories changes over centuries and millennia and decades, etc. So that's kind of my basic thesis. I don't know what you think, but I don't want to come down too hard. And
Yeah.
I'm also again not trying to gatekeep the Odyssey, but I did finish it thinking like I don't know that that was what I expected at the very least.
I think I understand everything you're saying. I think the issue is that I don't view the actual books, the Iliad and the Odyssey, as interesting character studies of people.
Hmm.
I think they are interesting action films, and I think they are interesting religious texts that demonstrate the degree to which the Greek people believed that they had no agency in their own lives and that these cosmic deities were basically using humanity at their own whim and will to suit their own fancies. But in the scene you described with Athena, and in basically every other scene of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the human characters are so totally devoid of any agency over their own lives or choices or actions that I don't find it as nearly as interesting of a human character study as I find this Christopher Nolan version. I think that there are certainly merits to the text, but I don't think those merits lead to good storytelling in 2026 or certainly a good blockbuster movie in any way, shape, or form. And I could elaborate further on like what I think Christopher Nolan is doing specifically, but like that would be like my direct response.
Do you think that's true of the Odyssey? I feel like that's true of the Iliad. But like if again, not to get this is obviously like a wide ranging conversation, but I feel like Odysseus is a very like both Odysseus and Penelope and Telemachus in the text to me are very like fleshed out characters. Like Odysseus is constantly pulling off all kinds of schemes. He's constantly ending up in situations where his pride lands him in hot water, not because he needed to do something, but because he felt like showing off his own skill and mental prowess. And he has like an inner rage that he can't control at inopportune times. Like I don't know, I feel like there are strong characteristics that he has that are genuinely like the romance that happens when he comes home in the movie to me is equally strong, at least in the book, between him and Penelope. Like there's such a strong human connection there. Like I was actually very taken aback by how like kind of overflowing and romantic it was in comparison to like what I would have expected from an ancient Greek text.
Yeah, I mean, their character, like their characteristics are real. I just don't think their like motivations or progression is particularly authentic, right? Like you learn
Mm.
very early through prophecy that Odysseus cannot die because Athena has petitioned Zeus, who has
Right.
determined like, and that his crew will die. But like Poseidon wants, the gods are still the ones making the choices. At every turn, Athena is more than happy to bail out Odysseus as Zeus stays Poseidon and kind of like a God and Satan situation in the book of Job, where it's like you actually can't kill Odysseus because I, Zeus, have ruled it such. So like there's just very little like jeopardy or stakes in his return. Like certainly for him, more so for his crew. I think you understand the extent of the ordeal, but he never feels particularly endangered
Don't
throughout
you
the
feel like that's true in this movie though? I mean, the prophecy tells him that similarly that
right.
he's going to make it home
But I
and his
think
crew
what
won't.
this movie
I
is
think it's true of both.
But I think what this movie is doing differently is making fate much more abstract. It's like less tied to the actual characters of the gods and much more just this cosmic force that impacts all people. And then that leaves room for what Christopher Nolan really cares about, which is the psyche, like the actual internal struggle of a great man who has wrought so much power and also destruction on the world. And
Right.
like, I guess like if you have any more like specific things you want to talk about with this adaptation, that's great. But like my fundamental treatise here is that while I would happily watch the Robert Eggers version of the Odyssey that takes every aspect of it serious to the 10th degree, and while I would happily watch the Odyssey by someone like Gareth Edwards or J.J. Abrams, who would be very
I would
detailed.
absolutely not. No, that would be terrible.
Well, no, my point is like
Yeah.
my point is like there are lots of like more bland but technically proficient directors who could make a very faithful adaptation of the Odyssey competently. Gareth Edwards could do that and make it look good. J.J. Abrams could do that and make it look good. But like Christopher Nolan, I hold to a higher degree of like his movies are so rare and they are so special that I care about what Christopher Nolan thinks about the Odyssey. I don't want Christopher Nolan to make Homer's version of the Odyssey. Like there are other lesser filmmakers who could do that. Like what I care about, what I want to know when I watch Christopher Nolan's version of the Odyssey is what he cares about because he is such a singular like intellectual and philosophical force in this world right now and certainly in my life that like that is where my primary interest comes from. And whether you want to trace it, and I'm prepared to trace it through, I could trace the Odyssey through every single Christopher Nolan film to date. And I think that like the body of work that he has built that has led to the Odyssey is fascinating and worthy of so much merit in its own right. And there are many other lesser directors who, with slightly lesser money, could make the exact version of the Odyssey that you are talking about. That is very faithful, but that lacks the perspective of a director. And I think Christopher Nolan rightly refuses to compromise his perspective on any project he takes because he has that power.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm certainly interested in the perspective of Christopher Nolan on the Odyssey. Just like I'm interested in many perspectives on it because it is such a universal text, which is why I don't like this is not a hill that I'm gonna die on in terms of like, well, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, or this is a desecration of Western civilization, and certainly, not gonna go down all kinds of ridiculous roads that many have gone down, which I just think are insane. But I do think that like I think to me I am equally interested in Nolan's perspective and the perspective of the text in bringing like ancient texts to life because they do have so much richness. Like when I'm looking at a story like this, I want to be transported into another time in another place and understand like the perspectives of people who are not me, I guess. And like I think Oppenheimer, to me Oppenheimer is like Christopher Nolan's seminal work to this point because I think Oppenheimer is telling the story of 20th the world in the 20th century, kind of similar to how Odysseus does in this movie. Oppenheimer recognizes that like he has changed the fate of the world, over the course of a few years in a truly dramatic way. And I think that holds very true. And I think that like to me, I think Nolan tried to bring that similar perspective to a sort of mythical version of another time in the Odyssey. And I think it really does. I think it is successful in a lot of ways, but I think it also, instead of bringing a new perspective, kind of transposes kind of an already existing perspective onto the old story in a way that like I think we'll see how it ages for me. And I'm interested once I rewatch it and rewatch it again, kind of where it lands for me in the Nolan pantheon. But I do think that like I expected it, and maybe I shouldn't have, given who Christopher Nolan is. I think he loves to. He's always like you're right. He's telling a story kind of throughout all his movies, which I think is a lot of fun. Um, but I think it wasn't exactly what I expected, and that doesn't mean that he was bad by any means. But it did leave me with I think more questions than answers, at least on the first watch through.
think that's I again, I think that's totally fair, and I definitely think that if you are reading the Robert Fagles version of the Odyssey and then expect to see that translated to screen, change your that's not what you're gonna get.
Yeah. Th-
But I think that like I said, to me, Christopher Nolan, as someone who keeps on getting a bigger blank check, that's not just because like, from a financial that is because his movies are so lucrative, but that's also
Right.
because his perspective in this culture is so significant. And the stories that he tells are so significant. And I don't like again, I don't mean to denigrate any other film. Like I would love, like I said, I would love to see Robert Eggers take a hyper literal approach to the Odyssey. And like I'm sure Bill Murray would love to play Zeus. Like I just like I'm sure that I'm sure that someone they would love to make that happen.
Willem
But
Dafoe's Poseidon. Yeah.
yeah, totally. That could totally happen. And it would be weird and it probably would not be as nearly as successful or
Definitely not.
financially lucrative. But I think that like I said, like Christopher Nolan is not just a master technician. He is a master of storytelling. Like see Memento, see The Prestige, see I mean everything. Even Tenet and for all its weirdness is just a fascinating story. And with hugely ambitious ideas, not just visual feats, but ideas inside of it. And I'm just glad that he refuses to bend to anyone, even to Homer. Nolan refuses to bend to anyone. And like I said, from following his first film, which is the story about a trickster who thinks he's in control only to realize he isn't, all the way to Oppenheimer, which is about a great man grappling with the moral weight of the decisions he has wrought. Interstellar is about what aspects of civilization are worth preserving. Inception is about a man trying to get home to his family at all cost. Dunkirk is literally about a group of men trying to cross an ocean to get home, and The Prestige is about a man playing chance with death over and over and over, and the weight that that puts on his own psyche as Hugh Jackman just continues to drown himself over and over and over. And Memento is about a man like using tokens to remember all he's lost. And like in the Odyssey, spoiler, but like Odysseus doesn't remember until he grabs the token that his wife sent him to war with, that little sculpture of Athena that reinvigorates his memory. Like that is just Memento. Like this is everything that Christopher Nolan has been doing and everything that I've been studying as someone who watches all of his films multiple times, and it just feels like the continuation of his work. And it's not what I expected when I walked into the Odyssey, but certainly when I walked out of the Odyssey, it felt like every single puzzle piece of this 13 filmography that I have spent hours pouring my life into, every single puzzle piece falls into place in a very, very satisfying way for me.
And I'm just curious where he's going to go from here. In terms of scale, again, going back to the scale for a second,
Yeah, the Bible.
he, yeah, I mean, he made the biggest, one of the biggest movies ever that's not a 1960s sword and sandal epic with 8 billion extras, actually on camera. He's kind of kept scaling up. He scaled up with Oppenheimer to just a absolutely massive character study. Now he's scaled up into, you know, one of the most difficult stories to adapt ever. I don't know what direction he goes. You said, off air, maybe horror next. He's
Well,
expressed
that's
some
what
interest
he's
in that, which would
saying.
be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
I don't
mean,
know.
and there are certainly you can see him experimenting with new types of horror in the Odyssey in multiple sequences where he is trying to do both like creature feature and body horror that no one has never attempted before. And obviously his technical mastery is such that he can go into any genre, I think, and make something real. And if he did do horror or something else, like that there's not going to be any cheap effects or jump scares. Like everything he does is at the highest possible level. So I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, I'm certainly am not setting my expectations at bigger because that
No,
would
I
just
don't.
be
I don't know
absurd.
what you do next.
But
Yeah.
I do know that again because he's proven it time and time again that like nobody puts together a more thought out and masterful product than him.
It'll be interesting.
Yeah, it's gonna
I
rock.
am I'm excited. Kind of similarly like with Villeneuve. Like Villeneuve has Dune 3 coming out this year. That'll be an interesting Oscar race between these two movies, most likely. Um, you know, both of them are suddenly going to be kind of free of franchises, free of things that they're like necessarily planning as far as we know, um, to adapt. And you have kind of our two biggest filmmakers kind of just with open sea in front of them. And that's an incredibly exciting thing. I feel like I could imagine Nolan teaming up with Ryan Coogler somehow, given how much they seem to talk to each other. It'd be crazy if they kind of all work together somehow because they all seem to be good pals. So they probably won't, but you never know.
Yeah, I mean, Coogler is certainly in the mold. I think Denis, who's come from a different kind of is more of a contemporary of Nolan than like Coogler is like seems like he's like just Nolan's mentee, which is awesome.
Right,
And
of
he's
course.
he's going to be the torchbearer afterward. But I think even Villeneuve like is the only person who even like dabbles in the same heights that Nolan gets to. Like those to me, those are the two people who are whose movies are the biggest events, not just because they are massive, but because the floor of quality. You go into it knowing it's going to be that the floor is so high because they have built their entire reputations on the precision and the quality of what they put out. Like they are two directors who just refuse to compromise on quality at any point. And when you see all of these like the Avengers Doomsday trailer coming out, like you see all these movies that for whatever reasons, for time or money reasons, make so many just compromises in the quality of the films. It's amazing to have directors like Coogler, Villeneuve, and Nolan who stake their reputations on refusing to make those compromises. And I just feel like again, very blessed to live in this world at this time where I get to see these movies. And like Dune Part 3 is probably going to change my life. And The Odyssey absolutely changed my life. And everyone should see it 5 times in IMAX, at least.
Avenger 3 by the end of this week.
Yeah.
So I'm cooking over here. And I do think it is like, I think my last thought is like, it is a big deal because it is blockbuster scale excellence. Like there are a lot of filmmakers around who are doing really excellent films at a smaller scale that, they put a lot of craft into, but it is difficult to mobilize studio resources toward unique ideas in this day and age because of the money that is thrown at big actors in big franchise movies because those are like guaranteed moneymakers. And what we're seeing with these guys is that, they have found a formula to make excellent, thoughtful blockbuster films that people will go and see. And that is something we need because otherwise it's going to die out, and so that they at the top of the game kind of help the money trickle down to other smaller ideas like we've seen with Obsession and Backrooms. I'm not a horror guy or anything, but like those movies are a direct result of the innovation that is happening at the top of the game, leading to people seeking out unique ideas lower down the food chain. And I think that can only
Yeah.
help the future of movies.
Yeah. My closing thought on The Odyssey is just that it's my favorite movie of the year. It's one of my favorite movies of the decade. It's one of my favorite Christopher Nolan movies. And the fact that I can't think of a realistic comparison for this movie since like the early 1960s just makes me think that like you may not see something like this for like 40 years, 50 years again. Like the visual heights. Like we've spent a lot of time on the story and like things like that. And I talked about like the last 45 minutes, but like that's passing over. Legitimately, six of the greatest set pieces in the history of like the motion pictures. And he reaches a height that is so high that to miss it, you really don't know when the next time you'll ever see something at that scale and at that quality ever again in your life.
Yeah, it's unbelievably gripping. And again, he did it all for real.
Right.
That's I think the most remarkable part is it's like it is easy. Maybe it's not easy, but it is possible to film scale using visual effects, using computers, kind of taking all that stuff and then extrapolating it over time and space. Villeneuve does that a lot with the Dune franchise, and it looks amazing. But the difference with the Odyssey, um, is that kind of like we all joked when with the Trinity test that Christopher Nolan actually rented an atomic bomb so he could film it.
Yeah,
Like the Odyssey, he really did get a fleet of ships and go film it, and that is just like it. It's a tremendous visual treat. It is a great story. Um, I'm curious as I rewatch it, kind of how it'll age for me in terms of the storytelling as the classics nerd that I am. But I think no matter what your perspective on it is from a storytelling perspective, the experience is just the most undeniable
yeah.
experience that you can have.
I would say at least for one of your viewings, just take off your Homer hat and put on your Nolan hat and just take it in as like as a as a I think as a book as a current chapter in his work. It is the perfect integration of just everything that he's been about for since, 1998 with Following.
Yeah, it is very worth your time. And I think good movies always generate good conversations. And I'm glad we got to talk about it. And I hope that everyone else talks about it, because I think that that is like the joy of original movies is not just monoculture, but like actually like generating thoughtful conversations about what our world is. And I think that Christopher Nolan has always tried to do that with his movies, and I think that I've always appreciated that. And so I definitely like my closing thoughts. I think like I definitely had questions about the ideas of this movie that I wasn't sure that I necessarily agreed with in every area, but that happens because Christopher Nolan is interested in telling stories with ideas in them, which most filmmakers outside of, small indie stories these days are not interested in doing that. And I think that's what ultimately that is what matters to me. And I am thankful that he is in the position that he's in, asking questions and thinking thoughts and actually like being an intellectual on the world stage, because most filmmakers these days are just either trying to make money or are telling nonsense stories because they don't actually think about things very much. And so I'm glad that he does.
Yeah. It was a special time at the cinema, truly. Um, Next time we podcast, John, we will be doing a final wrap up on the World Cup, just kind of putting a final bookend on the tournament as a whole, our big cultural and storyline takeaways. We're also going to be kind of talking about some of the big stories that we've missed during the World Cup because it has been so all consuming. There have been lots of other sports things going on, including
Wimbledon. Yeah.
like a LeBron James free agency and a Lewis Hamilton win for Ferrari and like two tennis grand slams, like a whole lot going on. And I think also, John, the next time we podcast, we will also be really in the ramp up to the fall sports, like the NFL and the Premier League will be right around the corner, and the US Open. So we'll kind of be kicking into a new gear and a new rhythm of fall sports that becomes a very consistent rhythm for us. So it's going to be kind of a wind down, but also a catch up as we try to just take a breath and assess where we are in this now wide open sporting landscape because we have been in such a monoculture for the last 6 weeks or so. So it's gonna be fun to broaden our horizons yet again.
It's going to be great. I am excited for all the Premier League news. I can't believe the NFL is almost here. I'm going to watch the Odyssey at least probably 2 more times by the time we podcast next, if not more. So it's going to be a great time. And I'm looking forward to it's been a busy World Cup season, but I'm looking forward to kind of resetting and going again into the new calendar with you, sir.
Yeah, we appreciate everyone who has either stuck with us or joined us during this World Cup. We continue to do the same cultural work that we've been doing with the World Cup year in and year out. With every sport. And so please stick around for that. And you can interact with us on social media. And of course, subscribe to the pod so you get it in your feed every time. And until next time, John, we hope that you all continue to be well and be safe. And we'll talk to you later.
All right. Cheers, guys.